So I've worked with over 2,000 plus marketing agencies, AI agencies, coaches, consultants in B2B industries, B2C industries. I've worked with people wanting to get to 10K a month. I've worked with people wanting to get to 100K a month and a million a month and so on and so forth. And every single conversation I've ever had with anyone, no matter B2B, B2C, agency, coach, whatever it is, or whatever scale they want to get to, no matter who I'm speaking to, I have the same conversation 100% of the time. So instead of repeating myself 2,000 more times across our next 2,000 plus clients, I thought I'd just repeat myself one more time in this video. So let me explain myself. And by the way, this will apply to you whether, again, you're an agency, you're a coach, you want to get to 10K a month or 100K a month or a million a month, or you're in B2B or you're in B2C. It doesn't matter whether you have a done for you service or a done with you service or product. Again, it doesn't matter. So if you want to get more clients and ultimately make more money and grow your business, there are only 7 things that you can do. There is nothing outside of these 7 things that will impact your revenue. Now, which of the 7 you implement today that you put your immediate focus on purely depends on your current numbers. In other words, if you track your numbers correctly, it's very clear what you need to do. Whether I look at your numbers and tell you, whether you yourself look at your numbers and tell you, or you get the smartest person in the world to look at your numbers and tell you, we would all say the same thing. So let's start at level number 1. Level number 1 is to get a cheaper cost per qualified booked call. So by the way, this applies as well, even if you're not running ads. People think about a cost per book call applying only to ads. But here's the thing. If you have a YouTube channel and you have a 5K a month editor, you have a 10K a month creative director or, strategist, whatever you call them. Let's say that you are all in on that YouTube channel in terms of your cost on a monthly basis at 15K a month. Well, if you're generating 100 calls per month from your YouTube channel, your cost, assuming those calls are qualified, your cost per qualified book call is $150 in that case. So no matter what it is that you're currently doing, you will have a cost per qualified book call. You need to figure that out, because if you are in an industry that's high-end B2B, or that's slightly more saturated, like the e-com industry or the SaaS industry, if you're in the marketing agency world, or if, for example, you have a coaching program, but you work only with, for example, CEOs or any other hard to get in front of audience, then your cost per qualified call should be within reason around the $300 per call mark. Now, if you're in an industry like B2C, where you work with essentially anyone and everyone, or you're in the fitness industry, or if you have an agency and you're in a less saturated niche, such as local retailers, for example, or any other type of local business in general, then your cost per qualified call should be around, for what we see across our clients, it's usually around $100 to $150. We have a couple of clients at like 50, but they're more so outliers. So you should be around $100 to $150 cost per qualified book call. So immediately you can compare that KPI to where you're currently at. If you're in a, B2C type of industry, a cheaper cost industry in general, and however, your cost per qualified call is up at $450, well, immediately this needs to be the number 1 thing that you focus on right now. And again, I don't need to tell you that. You can just look at your current numbers, compare them to the KPIs, and then you can see if this should be a focus for you or not. Now, for most people, this is actually where their biggest constraint is. They just can't get enough qualified people on the calendar. And so there's 2 issues with this. Number 1, people just can't get enough qualified people on the calendar, period. And number 2, maybe they are getting qualified people on the calendar right now, but maybe they're only getting 10 or 20 or 30 book calls per month. And the problem is that they are not in control of that volume. In other words, if you're only relying on organic is great. So I'm recording this video right now. A lot of people are building personal brands at the moment. It seems to be the new hot thing. So organic is great. The problem is, if you rely 100% on organic, you are not in control of your acquisition, because if you wanted to double your company next month, let's say, for example, right now, you get 40 qualified calls a month and you're closing 10 new clients, let's say. Okay, if next month you wanted to close 20 new clients, because you're 100% reliant on organic, you can't take that 40 qualified call number to 80 calls next month with a click of a finger. Yes, you could argue you could, increase your number of posts per day that you're doing on YouTube or whatever your source is. Yes, you could argue that you could, try and find more viral videos and whatnot. But the inputs of organic do not directly correlate to the outputs. Whereas with paid ads, for example, if you spend 100,000 a month on ads and you wanted to double your company next month, you can just spend 200,000. Now, that doesn't mean to say you're guaranteed to get the same output in terms of volume of calls, but what it does guarantee is that you're going to get shown to 2 times more people per month. And maybe the constraint is, as I say, if you don't get, for example, uh, a double in qualified call calls, well, maybe your ads aren't as good as they need to be to convert a colder audience because now you're spending more, you go into a colder audience. And so now your ads need to do more, quote, heavy lifting. However, now we have a specific constraint that we can fix, which is your ads aren't good enough to convert a colder audience. So now we just need to make your ads better. And if we make your ads better, we can now spend 200,000 a month, which means we can double the business next month, obviously assuming all of the metrics downstream, staying to KPI. So that's the first thing. You can get a cheaper cost per qualified call. Now, again, if you're running ads and your cost per qualified call is too expensive, for example, you're in a, B2C industry and you're paying 350 per call as an example. Well, to get that 350 down to, I would say KPI for B2C most of the time, as I said, is 100 to 150 in that range, not 100% of the time, but roughly that's where you're going to land. You should be landing. So if you need to get a cheaper cost per qualified call on paid ads specifically, but there's only so many, like you could call them sub levers that are involved in getting the cheaper cost per qualified call. For example, number one, you can have a stronger offer. If you make a better offer, typically you'll get more volume. If you get more volume for the same amount of spend, obviously you're gonna decrease the cost by default. If you're getting a lot of volume right now, but your quality isn't that great, well, again, offers. If you make a better offer for a more qualified prospect that speaks to a higher tier of the market or a higher segment of the market, you're naturally going to get more qualified people, which again will decrease your costs. You've got just creatives, like not actually changing anything about what you're saying in terms of offer or mechanism or whatever, but you just make better creatives. Well, again, that's going to decrease your cost per qualified call. As I said, the mechanism is an extremely powerful lever to pull in order to get more volume and more quality through your ads. So the mechanism basically refers to why you. What about you and your offer, your business is exponentially better than every other competitor that your ideal client is weighing up? Like, what is unique and specific about you? People call it a unique mechanism. They also call it a USP, unique selling proposition. But essentially, it's the question of why you. And whatever your answer is to that question, you could make that more powerful. So, for example, as you know, AI right now is extremely hot in basically every single industry. So, if you are right now running an ad and your YU, unique mechanism, USP, whatever you want to call it, or your appeal, that's another word people use. If your appeal is essentially around how you run Facebook ads, but actually you have an AI deliverable that you use, well, you could swap out your unique mechanism of Facebook ads and replace that with your AI deliverable. And all of a sudden, your ads will perform significantly better, decreasing your cost per qualified call. So as I say, that's the first lever that you can pull in order to grow your business, basically, is to get a cheaper cost per qualified call. However, if you are in KPI for less saturated industries, as I said, 100 to 150 cost per call. And for more saturated industries, I would say around 300. Like, for example, ours, we're in the most saturated industry, which is agencies and coaches. And our deliverables aren't that sexy. We just do them extremely well, which is we run basically ads for our clients. So it's not that sexy. There's nothing new. There's nothing necessarily attractive about what it is that we do. So it makes our art, when we're trying to attract clients, it does make it harder for us. So our costs are around 400, but in our industry, that's pretty good. So, okay, if your costs are good on your cost per qualified call front, how else can you grow the business? Well, the next thing is obviously getting more of the bookings that you do generate to actually show up. So if you're booking 100 calls a month, all qualified, cost per qualified call looks great. However, you're only getting 40 of those to show up and you're actually having a conversation with only 40 of the 100. Well, obviously another easy lever that you can pull is just to get that 40 to 80, for example. Now, again, you would still, pending all of the metrics stay the same, assuming they all stay the same, you would again double your business just by doubling the show rate. Now, for the most part, if I would say again, when we talk about KPIs, B2B, any type of B2B industry, typically you want to be looking at north of 70%-ish around there is where you can definitely get it to. And if you're below, the reason you're below is not an industry issue. It's just simply that the playbook that you're implementing to increase show rate isn't that great and you need to improve it. B2C, typically we see it falls between 50 and 65%. If you're at 60+% for B2C, amazing. Like of course, again, there's always small improvements that you can make, but pending that you're not doing anything like stupid, with show rates, then if you're above 60% with B2C, I'd say you're in a pretty good spot. So then again, I would be like, okay, well, it's not going to be that lever. It's going to be one of the other 7. It could be the costs, your front end cost per qualified call, or it might be one of the following 5 that I'll get into. But if you are on the lower end of show rates, whether B2C, you're under 50%, for example, or B2B, you're under 70% ish. Most of the time, the reason why is, again, there's only a few levers that you can pull, right? One of the core reasons why people have a really low show rate is they simply don't treat bookings the same way as they treat leads. So with a lead, it's very common. Everybody, well, you should be doing this if you're not, but most people do this nowadays, which is call the leads in 5 minutes, right? You've heard that saying time and time again. Well, we do the same exact thing with our bookings. So anytime you get a new book call, we call that booking within 5 minutes. Now, obviously, they're already on our calendar. We don't need to try and set them. But what we do need to do is sell them on showing up. So what we do is we confirm 100% of the bookings that we generate. So if you was to book on a call with us, you'll get, pending it's in available hours, like, working hours. If you was to book on a call with us, you would get a call, you would get an SMS, an email, and a WhatsApp. Obviously, if we call you, you answer, you're not going to get the other three, right? It's like if we call you, you don't answer, we'll SMS, email, and WhatsApp to try and get in contact with you. And when we get in contact with you, we're trying to do two things. Number one, pre-qualify you to make sure that you're actually a qualified prospect for, what it is that we do. And typically there, what we'll do is we'll basically use your application. So before you book in a call with us, we have an application. We'll use that application as our like intro question. So it's like, hey, I saw your application. You said about XYZ. Could you confirm what exactly is that? Does that mean? What does that look like? Whatever it is, right? So we'll try to pre-qualify you, make sure you're a good fit for what it is that we do. Secondly, by the very nature of us just speaking with you, it kind of confirms the booking, but we do make sure 100% that you can definitely show up to your booking. Now, obviously, we don't confirm 100% of the calls, right? We intend to, well, that's our goal, but naturally you'll get bookings who just don't respond. Well, that's really all that will happen, right? You'll reach out, you don't hear from them. The person who does that confirmation process I just explained is what we call a sales coordinator. Now, we have a sales coordinator specific tracker, and they track, I think they track like 15 different metrics. We go very heavy on tracking. One of the metrics that they track, though, is two things. The confirmation rate, so out of 100 bookings, how many of those 100 bookings actually confirm? And then what we also track is a confirmed show up rate. So out of the calls who confirm, how many of them show up? And then we also do the inverse, which is non-confirmed. So basically, out of the non-confirmed calls, how many show up? Get this, our confirmed show up rate is 94%. Our non-confirmed show up rate is like 26%. So in other words, if we confirm a booking, they'll show up at 94%. If we don't confirm a booking, they'll show up at 26 or 24%. I think it might be at now. Drastic, right? It's very, very drastic. Now, here's the thing. Most people have a terrible show rate because all of their calls fall into the non-confirmed category because they don't confirm their calls. So in our case, it's not going to be 100% because some people, if you think about it, like if you confirm a booking, they may have already, like they could have shown, but because you confirm them, they're obviously like definitely going to show now, but like they probably were already going to show before. So it's not, you can't directly say if we just didn't confirm anyone, everyone's going to show at 24%. That you can't say, but it will be at least under 40, 50% maybe, right? Our show rate across the board is at like 75 to 80%, depending on the month and the volume and whatever else. But we're up close to 80% month on month. So if we didn't confirm though, we'd be consistently below, as I say, 50, 40%, I would say. And so that's most people's reality is my point. Nobody confirms. And so by default, all of their calls fall into the non-confirmed show rate category, hence why their show rate's terrible. So if there's one thing you take away from this video as a potential show rate, just confirm your bookings. As I said before, our non-confirmed show rate's 24 to 26%, call it 25%. So what we now do is we do basically two things. We will, every person that we don't get in contact with, we'll double book those slots. So if we have a booking at 9 a.m. And we try and reach out to them, they don't confirm, we'll then open up that 9 a.m. slot as a free slot. So then another call can get booked in at the 9 a.m. slot. So now at 9 a.m. on one closer's calendar, we'll have two bookings. That increases our availability, which is great. And it also increases what we call calendar efficiency, which is calendar efficiency basically refers to the number of live calls per day that you get per closer on average, right? Now, what we do though with the non-confirmed bookings, double book it. So we have two calls in the slot. Now, the new call that comes into, in this example, the 9 a.m. slot, what we'll do is we'll go through the same process with the new booking. We'll try and get it to confirm, reach out, etc., do the whole thing. If the new booking confirms and they're qualified, of course, then we will cancel the original non-confirmed booking. Because now what that does is it means that we have a call in that slot that's going to show up at 94%. If we didn't double book, we would have had a call in that slot that would have showed up at 26%, right? So we just increased our show rate just by swapping the calls out for that slot, in so many words. Also, though, what you'll find, this is very common, if you cancel a booking, typically 7-ish times out of 10, that will trigger a response from the prospect because they'll reach out and go, why was my call canceled? Now, all of a sudden, you just gotten a response from the prospect that before you couldn't get in contact with. And so now you can have a setter or a sales coordinator or even the closer or you as the founder, depending on, your revenue level. You can just reach out to that prospect, call them up and say, hey, so sorry for the cancellation. We tried to reach out beforehand. We couldn't get in contact. So we just thought that you were maybe serious, etc. So hence why we've canceled the call. However, I would love to have a mini conversation with you just to see if you are a perfect fit for what we do so that we don't waste your time, we don't waste ours. And if things look good, we can get you right back onto the calendar. And then you go through the pre-qualifying process and confirmation process exactly as I just said before. And all of a sudden now we reset that person. And here's the thing, you've just now taken that booking from a 25% show rate likelihood, you could say, and turned it into, because now you confirmed it, into a 94% in our case, right, using our numbers, 94%. That's what happened when we do that. So now we just increased, again, that it wouldn't be that slot because that would have been taken by another prospect, but you get the point. That booking, we've just now taken from a 24% to a 94% likely show rate. So on show rate, that's what you can do. Now, again, if your show rate is below KPIs, like I just said before, typically 50% to 60%-ish, 65% for B2C and 70% plus for B2B. If you're below that, do just what I just basically said. There's a lot more that goes into it as well. There's a lot of other things that we do, but if you want that, the 80% or the 20% that would drive the 80% of the results, it's going to be that. So do that. Get your show rate higher. Now, the next thing after show rate is obviously close rate, right? Now that you're booking a ton of calls, good cost, you are getting, a good amount of them to show up. Now you just need to close more of the ones that do show. Now, again, for the most part, like this is pretty standard across whether you're B2B agency coach, whatever, B2B, B2C agency coach. Obviously, revenue level doesn't impact it. You should be looking above 25% for the most part. Again, you're going to have your outliers, but most of the time, 25% plus close rate is what you want to see. At the same time, the second metric, nobody talks about this metric, but the second metric that's really important is the upfront cash collected, or AOV, per deal. So average order value, that's a commonly used metric in e-com, but in the coaching agency acquisition space, nobody talks about AOV. I don't know why, because it's extremely important. You might be closing at 35%, so your close rate looks good, which is what most people solely focus on. However, if you're closing at 35%, 40%, 50%, whatever, but you're closing at a price point that that is very low for what it is that you're doing, well, yeah, of course, if you charged $1 for your service, you could close at 100%, right? So if you're charging at 40%, well, is there not a lot of room there that we can increase price? So that's why you want to track both metrics, close rate and either upfront cash collection percent or AOV. Now, what we want to see typically is of our contract value. Contract value is basically the value of the initial term. So if you're an agency or a coach, most of the time, if you're an agency, you typically lock clients in for an X month minimum, right? 3-month minimum, 4-month minimum. If you're a coach, you'll typically do some kind of program length, right? It's the same exact thing. It's just different terms that different people use. But the program length usually might be a 12-week, 16-week, whatever it is for coaches. And so the contract value is basically what's the total amount over that period. I call it a project period. So that's the same. Project period is, in our case, 4 months. And as I say, it's the same no matter what terminology you use. So of the project period, how much do you charge? And then the AOV refers to, of that total contract value, how much are you collecting of that on day one? So typically, I want to see a 25% plus close rate or a 40% minimum upfront cash collection rate. So if you charge 10K for 4 months, I want to see on average, this is on average across clients who pay in full for the full 4 months, clients who do, or all clients who do a payment plan. On average, I want to see 4K, at least if you charge 10K, cash collected on day one and a 25% close rate. That's the key. And here, again, the same idea applies with the upfront cash, right? If your upfront cash is, say, for example, 90%, but your close rate is 5 or 10%, well, I would say most people look at that and go, wow, you're collecting 9K out of the 10K total contract value in our example. But I would look at that and be like, that's a bad thing. You need to allow more people to come in on a payment plan so that you can get the close rate up to 25%. Because if you're closing 9K out of 10K, right? 90% upfront cash. That clearly means that you're holding everyone accountable to basically only paying in full. Or if, worst case, it's 100% upfront cash. Well, as I say, you're basically forcing everybody to join only on paying fulls and no payment plans. Well, that's going to cause your close rate to drop off a cliff because not everyone can pay in full on day one. And so why don't we allow a lot more payment plans to come through, allow that 100% cash collection rate to drop to 40%, and meanwhile, your close rate's going to go up. And so after the project period, you're going to net a significant amount of more money, making your business grow, essentially, right? And this actually goes into the next point as well, which is basically just making more per client. So I'll get a client come to us and they'll be closing at 40%. I just had this the other day. We're going through a deal at the moment where I'm going to acquire a minority stake in another agency. And I probably shouldn't have gave him this free value up front, but whatever. We went and met them, me and my CFO, we went and met them a couple of days back, and they were showing us all their metrics. The numbers are amazing. But one of the things that she was not flexing, but she was like, look at how good our numbers are, was her close rate and her upfront cash. Her close rate was, I think it was like 42% over the last 30 days. Amazing close rate, right? But at the same time, her upfront cash was, I think it was like, she basically just does, you can come in today for like, I think she charges £7,000 for 4 months. And so, or 3 months, sorry, my bad, 3 months, £7,000 for 3 months. And so she does £2,000 down today. And then the remaining £5,000 is at the end of the first 30 days. So she'll just split it. That's basically what she sells everyone into. She tries to one call close some people, but she's in the aesthetic space. So it's that market's a little bit different in terms of just how they make decisions, which is fine. But here's the thing. Almost 100% of the clients she closes does that payment plan. So basically, they pay in full within the first 30 days. It's 2,000 today, 5,000, as I say, at the end of the first 30 days. But most clients, take that deal. So her upfront cash across the first 30 days, not necessarily on day one, but it's within the first month of them joining, which I would still class as day one, to be honest, is damn near 100%. It's like 92% and 93%, whatever it is. Most clients do that. So she's got a situation where she's closing 42% and her cash collections 92% in the first 30 days. I was like, and so, she was like, look how good this is. I'm like, this is not good. You're leaving so much money on the table. If you're closing 42% and you're collecting 100% cash close to it within 30 days, what this is showing me is you're severely underpriced. Like she could, and I told her this, she could take that number. I said 11.8 for the first 30 days. I thought about some of her other numbers as well, but basically I said, we can go to 11,800 and we can more than afford for our close rate to drop down to 1 in 3. So about 33% as opposed to the 41%. And again, we can just allow more payment plans. Like her cash ROAS, which is basically how much you spend versus how much you collect today, was off the charts. I can't remember exactly what the number is. I could figure it out, but it's not really relevant. That was off the charts. So she doesn't need to collect as much money day one as she is, which means we can allow more prospects to come through on a payment plan. But remember, that payment plan's on a higher price point. So again, across the first project period, which is the first, in her case, is 3 months, we're going to make significantly more, even though our close rate has dropped. So that is the next lever. I think, what is it? Lever number 4. So you got cost per call, you got increasing churn rate, obviously increasing close rate, and then, as I say, increasing prices to make more per client. So now that you're closing, let's make as much money as we can per new client. And again, the close rate and upfront cash collection metric are basically a proxy for how much you can charge, essentially. This is where it gets interesting. Close rate and upfront cash are a proxy for how much you can charge, assuming your current skill set. If you're a bad closer, you can only charge so much, but that doesn't mean to say that is how much the market is willing to pay for this service. It's just, again, it's kind of like a proxy for how much the market is willing to pay based on the conversation they've had with you and your company. Now, if you increase your sales skill, then all of a sudden that same prospect, same offer, same deliverable, same business is now all of a sudden willing to pay way more, not because anything's changed about what it is that you do, the value you provide, whatever. It's just based on the quality of a conversation, or in other words, the sales call. Now they're all of a sudden willing to pay a lot more, essentially. Now, here's the thing. Once you quote unquote max out the sales skill, if you then keep increasing price, there's only so much your market's going to be willing to pay. That's where I would then go to the close rate and the upfront cash collection metrics as my insight into how much is this market willing to pay, assuming you've quote maxed out the sales skill. So hopefully that makes sense. Anyway, so you got get more qualified calls for a cheaper cost, make more of them show, increase the close rate, so close more of the ones who do show, increase your price, so just make more money per client that you close. Now, this is where you go into fulfillment metrics. Now, there's basically two major fulfillment metrics. You've got the churn rate and you've got your cost to deliver, basically. And this is where most people, I would say, obviously, out of the ones who have good front end acquisition, I see this a lot for some reason with B2C coaches in particular. Their front end acquisition metrics are just ridiculous. You know, like they get such cheap costs. A lot of those guys finance deals, so their upfront cash is actually extremely high. But because they finance, the same logic that I just explained doesn't apply because they're financing. So it's going to arbitrarily increase their cash collection rate. But most of them, as I say, they have they have significantly cheap front end acquisition metrics, yet their margins are terrible. And so they try and attack that problem from my experience. And again, I said this is common for B2C coaches, but it goes for anyone who's in this situation. Front end acquisition metrics look great, but margins aren't that great. So then again, obviously, as you then scale, your margins decrease. It always happens no matter what. You're not going to get away from that. So they try scale and then they can't. They're at a cap. That constraint becomes profitability. And so then what they do almost 100% of the time is they go back to their ads and they try and either launch a new funnel because clearly, you know, their profit's bad. So, you know, our acquisition doesn't work, or our acquisition needs to be better, or we need to get cheaper costs. And like with this funnel that we're currently running, our cheapest cost, we're currently experiencing our cheapest cost. So we need to do a new funnel, right? Like that's what they jump to. Or as I say, they would just, you know, referencing here all the clients that we've worked with in the past, they'll just come to us and be like, we need to get cheaper costs. And I look at their acquisition numbers, I'm like, the last thing you need to do is change whatever it is that you're currently doing on the front end, because these numbers are ridiculous. So typically, as I say, 100% of the time, their problem will be either churn rate or just their cost to fulfill is through the roof. Now, with B2C, the good thing about B2C is that you can typically, if you do it right, get your cost to fulfill down to not zero, but like very, very close to it. If you're doing some kind of like one-on-one, you know, if you're in the coaching space, then you have some kind of one-on-one support. Well, the good thing about that is typically whoever's delivering the one-on-one support, number one, doesn't need to be overly skilled or like that much of an expert because you're working with, you know, B2C. So typically if you're working with B2C, you're helping them go from, you know, basically nothing in whatever it is that you're helping them do to just the very first level. So for example, easy example is you help people start an agency. Well, obviously, if you're in the B2C industry, you're not helping people scale an agency from 50K a month to, you know, 500K a month. That's basically B2B. What you're helping them do is go from zero and get their first couple clients. Well, again, the good thing about that is that you don't need somebody who's a crazy expert to work with your clients to help them get off the ground with their agency and get their first couple clients. You need somebody who's probably just done that themselves. Maybe they're at 5, 10K a month with their own agency, but they hate working with their agency. They don't like it. And so they're just looking to make, you know, 5, 6, 7 grand a month, helping others get their first couple of clients. Well, again, that person, number one, is pretty cheap to acquire on your team as labor. And number two, they can typically manage a lot of clients, which if you think about our constraint here that we're discussing, which is cost to fulfill, well, if you hire the right person, which is really what you want to hire there, you're not trying to hire their experience, their track record, or whatever it is. You're just trying to find a good person who cares about clients, values client results, you know, it's very proactive, all those good human traits that we try and find in our team. That's all you're trying to find. So again, you can pay them a relatively low amount, but they'll still be happy with it. So that's going to be a huge win for the person that you hire. And secondly, as I said, because it's B2C, they'll be in a more of a coaching role. It's obviously not going to be done for you. And if it was done for you, you'd be able to increase your price, which will allow you to pay more anyway. So you kind of, you know, it nets out. Um, but if it's B2C, it's going to be a coaching role, which means your coaches for your B2C product should be able to manage a lot of clients. And what that will then result in is the per client per month amount that is, that basically the expense that you have for coaches per client per month should be extremely low. So if you think about, if I just do some math here, if you charge, say, for example, 6,800 over 4 months, 6,800 over 4 months is what, 1,700 a month? Yeah, 1,700 a month. Okay. Well, if you have a coach who charges, for example, 150 per month per client, which I would even say that that's quite high, that's only 8% cost of goods sold, 8.8%. So we'll call it 9% cost to fulfill, specifically referring to the coach expense, right? But again, here's the thing with B2C, the coach expense is really probably 95% of your expenses to fulfill, because the other expense you've got is maybe your community platform, whatever cost that is, that's obviously going to be nothing. You may have some like softwares to help client results and whatnot, but again, that might amount to like 1,000 a month, 2,000 a month. But typically, those types of software expenses are going to be a software expense across all clients. So now you've got 2,000, but that's spread across all of your clients, which again makes a per month per client amount basically nothing. And then you may have some like ancillary support roles, which again is very common, like admin, maybe some tech help or whatever it is. But typically, those amounts or those costs, those expenses should also be split across all clients, which again makes the per month per client amount extremely low. So in this case, let's say the coach specifically per month per client is 9%. Well, if you say, for example, budget for 10% all costs per month per client, well, now all of a sudden, your monthly cost per client is $170. You're charging them 1,700. So you're netting 1,600 per month per client. But here's the thing. Most people just overpay their team from my experience. They'll, be paying a basic coach 500 per month per client or 1,000 per month per client, and they're really not doing anything. So that would typically just be a basic restructure. That's the most common thing that I see. And that's why I explained that example. However, that again applies to whether you have a B2B service. Like with ours, we work with businesses. So we're B2B, well, significantly high ticket, and we're done for you. So basically, the complete opposite of the example I just explained. Here's the thing. How I think about my fulfillment cost is exactly how I just explained. We have our core account manager who obviously runs our clients. They get a per month per client amount. And then we have a ton of ancillary roles like tech. We have like a CSM admin type of person. We also have a copywriter for each client. And then we also have video editors for each client. And then actually we have a lot. We also have a sales coach, not for each client. We have they're basically, how it works is it's not one-on-one sales coach. It's well, yeah, we technically do offer one-on-one sales help, but the way they're billed isn't per month per client. It's a set amount, which again is split across all clients, which drives down the per month per client amount, which increases margins. So anyway, that's the sixth, I think, lever that we're referring to here is cost to fulfill. And again, typically, most people who are struggling with profit but have great acquisition metrics, usually it's going to be either exactly what I just explained. So you need to restructure the model. And every client, also, I want to mention before I get into the last one, which is churn rate, every single client says that they can't do basically the model I just explained because their business is so different and they're such a, unique snowflake. And we all think that, but it's just not the case. If you run an agency coaching business, B2B or B2C, doesn't matter. If you have that business model, what I just explained worked. And I could say that with certainty because not only do we run it, so I just know it works, I see it firsthand, but also, as I said, we've implemented that into every one of our clients, and every single one, maybe the structure and the makeup of it's a little different, but it works 100% of the time across the board if you implement it correctly. So that's that. The fact, obviously, the last one's churn rate, which is basically making more over the lifetime of a client. Now, churn rate typically is very simple. It's just if you have a high churn rate, your service isn't good. I mean, that's like a lot of people try and say like, oh, again, based on our business model, our clients don't retain, but it's not because our service is so bad. It's just because the thing that we help them with, like once we give it to them, they don't want it anymore. So like, that's it. And it's like, no, if you have a high churn rate, which for the most part, unless you're B2C, which I can explain the difference here in a minute, but, if you have double digit churn, your churn rate's too high, in my opinion, especially if you have any type of done for you deliverable. Like you should be single digit churn, in other words, 9% or below month on month. like 100% of the time. So again, if you have double digit, it's just because your service isn't either delivering the value that the client wants or doesn't align with their original expectations. So there is two ways to improve churn. You either improve the product itself, make the product more valuable, and obviously there's a whole host of things that kind of are tied to that, or you change the expectations the client has coming into the product. So they expect less and you deliver more. Again, you can achieve that by just delivering more, or you can just make them expect less. And then what you're currently delivering by default is more, if that makes sense. So they're the two major ways. And then if you're B2C, typically you're not obviously going to have some kind of like monthly continuity offer. For the most part, you're not. Usually that's going to come in the form of some kind of back end. And also the same applies for B2B, but it's more common B2C. You have some kind of higher ticket backend, like a mastermind program or just a, more typically it's mastermind, but some higher ticket sort of, if you're charging, say 9,800 for 3 months or 4 months on the front end with some kind of coaching offer, then, typically you could probably get away with like a 25 to 30 grand yearly offer in the back end, which you obviously ascend everyone into. And then the people who don't ascend, they'll be counted into your churn rate. So usually they're the solutions. And then of course, if you have some kind of done for you or you're in B2B, then usually monthly is the solution there for your churn. Like with us, we don't have a back end mastermind. We just have an ascension offer, which is continuing, the original service that we're providing in the initial 4 months as well. So they're the six, but there's a seventh. Now, one of the things that's also quite common is we might get a client come to us. We'll go through all their metrics. We have this extremely in-depth, like I call it a master business tracker. So it tracks every single metric far beyond the ones that I've just mentioned in this video. But basically, when a client fills that out, they send it to me. I can just look at it and I can just tell them obviously exactly what the constraint is or where their focus needs to be. But sometimes they'll send me that and I'm trying to find that current constraint. And of course, I always say, no matter what, there is always a current biggest constraint. That doesn't mean to say all your numbers might be amazing, but there would still be a constraint no matter what, right? Constraint, most of the time it's associated with a bad thing, and most of the time it is a bad thing. Like, your close rate's 4%, like that's a constraint. You need to improve it, and that's really bad, right? We need to improve it. But other times, again, a constraint doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It's just normally associated with a bad thing, so people think constraints are bad, but they're not. Like you might have amazing metrics, but still, if you wanted to improve something, there was still a current biggest constraint. However, in that instance, the seventh thing that you want to think about basically is volume. So one of the questions I always ask myself is, why can't we double our ad spend tomorrow? And usually that brings up a constraint, right? The reason we can't double our ad spend tomorrow is because maybe, one of the metrics I mentioned, or maybe it's capacity, which means you have to hire someone, which is where the hiring piece comes into it. But like, normally if you ask yourself that question, something pops up. Well, we can't double our spend because we're already not profitable based on the current spend. So if we double, we're only going to be less profitable. Or we can't double our spend because, our closer availability is basically zero. Like we've got no availability. Okay, great. We need to hire a new closer. Or our churn rate's through the roof. So I'm not going to put more clients into a fulfillment system that's got, holes in it. Okay, great. We need to, but sometimes you ask yourself that question, you realize, oh, we can increase spend. Maybe you don't double, but like we can increase by 50%, or we can just scale volume in general. In that case, that's where you would then just push more volume through the system. So that's really the seventh thing, which is just push more volume. But the reason why I like to start with the first six is because that increases efficiency. And then if all that looks good, the last thing is volume. Great. Let's push more volume through the system. Now, this takes me all the way back to finish off the video here. It takes me all the way back to the first point that I raised. If you go through those metrics, you realize everything looks great. I can scale. Great. You go to the volume piece and go, great, let me double our volume. Take it back to the original point. If you are not running paid ads or some other type of acquisition system, like maybe called outbound, etc., where the inputs, the more inputs you make, the more clients, bookings, whatever metric you want to look at, the more basically outputs you get. If you don't have that type of system, if you want to scale, ideally, you need to keep doing what you're currently doing. Typically, it's organic or relying on referrals or whatever, right? Like they're great methods for acquisition, don't get me wrong. But if you want to scale, you can't rely on only that method, because now in this case, we can scale. Let's scale next month, but you can't do anything to increase your volume because you're not in control of the volume that you're generating. It's kind of, inconsistent. You might post a video, it might blow up. You'll get a ton of bookings, great. But the next month when you don't post a viral video, it's like, well, no bookings are coming through. You can't do anything, right? And again, like I say, you're not in control. So if you want us to double next month, you can't just double your inputs. Whereas if you run paid ads, if you do some kind of cold outbound, any type of acquisition method that you are in control of, then you can just now, everything looks great based on the 6 numbers. You look at volume, let's double, great. If you run paid ads, you just double your ad spend. If you do cold outbound, you just double your volume of new sends per month or per week, however you track it. So that's everything for this video. That took me, I don't know, 30 or 40 minutes to say one time, which is great because now I'm going to continue to send this video out to everybody who asked me about this, because honestly, this conversation is what I have 100% of the time with 100% of the clients that I speak to. So hopefully you found that valuable. If you did, like, subscribe, do all the good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one.